Arrow.net. It's where all the conversation is. ARROE.net. All right, let's do some pod crashing. Episode number 172 is with David Weinberg from the podcast, The Superhero Complex. Oh my God, David, you have got a podcast here that so many people are going to tune into because we all believe that we're superheroes somehow, some way, and we're going to prove it.
Isn't that the truth?
I mean, it's like anymore. It's like, what's your superpower? And it's because there's just so many different, levels anymore. It's like, yeah. And look at what you do with Phoenix here. I mean, you're showcasing somebody that was real. He really got out there and did this.
Yeah. He went out there and he tried to actually fight crime, try to stop people from being mugged and break up fights and like all the things you'd expect to do from a superhero.
How were you introduced to him? Because we're talking about a lengthy podcast here, several different episodes on iHeartRadio. I mean, you really have some information here.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know much about him when I first heard about it. I got asked to work on the show. I started doing some research, and so my first introduction to him was just like watching his patrol videos and sort of like seeing him from afar and kind of learning about what he is. And then I was introduced to him through a guy named Peter Tangen, who's a photographer who sort of became his unofficial press agent. He's the guy who shoots a lot of the big Hollywood movie posters for superhero projects. So if you saw like Christian Bale as Batman in that movie poster, like he shot that. And so he introduced me to Phoenix, and that was how our relationship started and how I started interviewing him for the show.
And Phoenix really, I mean, he had those two different personalities. I mean, in real life, he was Ben. He was an MMA wrestler, and all of a sudden, but at night, he was Phoenix.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was Phoenix Jones. He had a full-on superhero like high-tech costume that was made of like non-Newtonian fluid, which means it's soft to touch, but if you tried to hit him, it's really like hard. He had gadgets. The gadget portion of his story didn't always go as you might expect. There was a lot of like getting caught in his own net in the beginning of his superhero career, but he stuck to it and he kind of figured out how to actually become an effective crime fighter in a lot of ways.
How did the city of Seattle embrace that? Because I grew up in the state of Montana. Seattle to me was the hero city, but to be out there on the streets of Seattle, it's like, what? Did they really embrace this?
I would say a lot of people did. Yeah, there was sort of a mixed reaction. There was he definitely had a lot of supporters, people that were like, yes, we need this, we support you. When he would be out on patrol at night, a lot of the time it would be him just having to get photos with people. People like, Phoenix, let me get your photo. And he became sort of a celebrity, knows his own right. He also had a lot of detractors, people who thought he was a nerd or a goofball or delusional. And then he had this very complicated relationship with the police. The police were very much not fans of his work and did not see what he was doing as being helpful to the city. And in fact, they often felt that he was kind of getting in the way of a lot of the work that they were trying to do.
Doesn't that sound like Bruce Wayne and Batman? My God, not everybody believed in Batman
yeah, totally
either.
Ripped straight out of a superhero movie,
Well, I've always believed that Bruce Wayne, somewhere along the line, they're going to have to show that he really was into drugs and all that kind of stuff, too. This last one with Robert Pattinson showed the softer side and the darker side of Batman. They've got to go the extra distance because Bruce Wayne went through some junk in his life before becoming Batman.
Yeah, that stuff affects you. And in a similar fashion, Phoenix had his own demons and his own issues, and he ultimately did end up getting caught selling drugs to undercover cops. To put it mildly, it tarnished his image, and it made it very difficult for him to go out anymore and say, "I'm a hero." People were like, "You're not a hero. You're just another criminal." Like all these people that you claim to be. A lot of what he did was try to break up crack dealers out on the street and stuff. So it definitely made him look like a hypocrite, and he's been struggling with that ever since.
So did he meet up with somebody along the way that said, "Hey man, don't fight us, join the system and reap with the rewards"?
No, the police were never interested in Phoenix joining them. Their whole thing was just leave the crime fighting to us.
Okay.
You do your own thing and we will take care of pursuing the bad guys in the city of Seattle. Man, I wonder if, inside his mind, if he wanted to go to Portland over the past couple of years, the way that Portland, basically was falling apart, it needed a superhero. Yeah, he did, Phoenix kind of, I guess you could say went into retirement after the drug arrest and wasn't really doing much. But then, in January, shortly after that, there was an area called the Chaz, or the Chop, which you remember in Seattle. And it had sort of like a lawless vibe to it, and Phoenix did resurface and started patrolling that area too. But he rarely patrolled outside of Seattle. He did do a little bit of crime fighting in London while he was there on a promotional trip for a cell phone company, but he mostly stuck to, his hometown, Seattle.
Was he a headlines hunter, creator, and things like that? Was he looking for the headlines, or was he just out there saying, "No, I'm Phoenix. I'm Phoenix Jones"?
Well, it depends on who you ask. If you ask Phoenix, he would say that no, he was not particularly interested in fame. It was more that he needed it. One thing about Phoenix is that he is a black man, and he's always felt that he needed to have a superhero persona in case the police showed up and saw him. He didn't want to be mistaken for a criminal. And so his whole point was, well, I'm just wearing the superhero suit mostly to protect myself, so that when people arrive, they clearly see that I am not the criminal in this instance. But after spending a lot of time talking to his former teammates, they all say that is not true, and that Phoenix was very much about being famous. There was a lot of arguments within the team. I even heard one story from a journalist who was with Phoenix. They were out on patrol. They heard a woman scream, and this is like Phoenix springs into action, starts running towards the screaming woman. Some people stop him and say, "Hey, can we get a photo with you?" He stops chasing for this woman and stops and gets photos. And by the time he's done all his photos with these people, the screaming woman's nowhere to be found. So I feel like those sort of interactions do tell me a little bit about that Phoenix probably was a little more interested in fame than he's willing to admit.
Oh my God, that sounds like something that would be on Netflix on Bad Guys. Oh my God, that's Bad Boys. What amazes me about this is that it's almost like he took his MMA fighting background and he took on this persona like a professional wrestler from the WWE. I mean, but yet he took it to the streets of Seattle, and I've been on the streets of Seattle. I don't want to go down there by the Fisherman's Wharf or anything like that.
Yeah, I know. He prided himself in going to these places where the crime was happening. He's not just sort of wandering around randomly. He's a very bright guy. He spends a lot of time studying crime statistic maps, and so he's able to figure out where are crimes happening in clusters, and he'll be in those places. So he very much, is all about going to places where that are sketchy or where the crimes are actually happening and being a presence in those places. So, that was a big part of how he fought crime.
Well, dude, if I was a radio jock in Seattle, I would have been all over this and putting this dude on the morning show.
Oh, he had his 15 minutes of fame for sure.
He
was on Good Morning America. He was on Fox News. He was on a lot of daytime talk shows. Yeah, when his fame kind of peaked, I'd say around 2011, 2012, and he was a fixture on the circuits of a lot of those shows, local and national. He had a pretty good following for a while.
And part of that following was in the circle that he kept. I mean, who were the Rain City superheroes? I mean, we're talking about more than one superhero here.
Oh yeah, no, he had a whole crew. They're called the Rain City superheroes. There was Midnight Jack, who claims to be a former gangbanger who's, gone on the other side of the law. You had El Caballero, who, had lived all over the world before that. You had Evocatus, who was a former military vet. He'd fought in Iraq before he joined the real life superheroes. You also had Ghost, who was also a military veteran who had done some combat. You had a real ragtag mix of like former criminals and soldiers and a couple just random nerds thrown in there. It was a mix of all kinds of people who were all hell bent on, saving their city from crime.
Did any of those guys inside the Rain City superheroes, did they become Phoenix's sidekick or anything? Because every superhero needs a sidekick. Yeah,
he never had one. He never said like, "You're my sidekick," but he definitely there was definitely a hierarchy, and there were, different people sort of occupied that second in command spot at different times during the history of the group. So for sure, there was usually someone who, kind of took the reins of being number two to Phoenix.
So I know that if I went out there to try to be a superhero, there'd be a bullet in my leg and a heartbeat or in my chest. How did he not get shot during these situations?
He'd been shot at. He's been stabbed multiple times, but he's never actually been shot. And he prides himself on that. He also, he would say that it's because he does a lot of training. So he, in addition to his MMA training, he actually learns how to do like knife disarms and hand-to-hand combat. So he definitely puts a lot of time and thought into, doing that sort of training so that he does not get killed.
That's interesting, because I'm a third-degree black belt, and the one thing that they trained us in all of my studies and even today, it's like to walk away from the bad situation. It's not to walk into the fire.
Oh yeah, no, it goes against a lot of those ideas. But I think partly what helped him too is that he was a semi-professional MMA fighter, so he did have experience being in a ring, fighting someone. So I think he was a little more willing to jump into those situations than a lot of other real life superheroes who maybe don't have that experience.
As that journalist, what did you learn? Because, when you take a story like this and you make it reach beyond a 2-minute report on Channel 9 News, come on, you've got a huge podcast here. What did you pull from this?
I learned a lot about real life superheroes, a group that I was not really aware of before this. I came to, when I first started doing this, I really did think that it was kind of an absurd thing, that it was kind of a joke, and like, did these guys really do any good? But, one thing I did do for this project was go out on patrol with some real life superheroes, with Phoenix Jones, with Red Ranger, with Justin Service. And I was very impressed with the work they do. A lot of what we did on patrol was humanitarian aid. So one of the superheroes that I went out with, Red Ranger, his day job is that he's a registered nurse in an ER. And so we were traveling around to a lot of these homeless encampments in the city, and a lot of those people are in really bad shape. They're suffering from mental health issues and addiction issues. And Red Ranger was able to do a lot of things to help them administer first aid, help some people with some really bad intravenous needle wounds. And I was just in awe of just like how much good they were doing in the community. And I did come away thinking like, there's a place for these people in our society. Like, they do good work, and I'm a lot less skeptical of what they do as a concept.
What was
as for Phoenix, that's a whole other complicated. You'll have to listen to the podcast to hear how I feel about Phoenix.
And
no spoilers.
It's more than listening, to experience the podcast, because the way that you present it, this is an experience. And then when you wrap up the first episode, you go, give me the next one. Let's go. Let's rock.
That's great to hear. Yeah, no, that's what we're trying to do, is get people into the story, and hopefully you'll come along for this ride with us and get to experience a lot of what I experienced, interviewing and hanging out with these superheroes.
We're going to talk the business side of podcasting. They're always telling you who's your audience, who are you trying to reach, and things like that. When you're putting this podcast together as the creator, as the voice, and probably you're doing a lot of the writing, who are you trying to reach? Is it are we going to see you at a Comic-Con?
I will go anywhere that anywhere I'm needed. Much like Batman, wherever the back signal goes up, if you need me to come talk about my podcast, I will be there. I have been to Comic-Con in the past as like sort of a casual observer. And I would do that again. But I'm happy that anyone's listening. When I'm making stuff, I'm just like, well, ideally, I'd love to get people who maybe are skeptical of this. That's like the people that I'm most excited to hear it. The idea that I could maybe suck someone into a world that they are skeptical of, and then sort of come to appreciate would be an ideal situation for me.
So what was Phoenix's superpower? Because you talked to me about the nurse and things like that. Phoenix had to know what his power was.
Yeah, so he had a number of powers. One, he's a trained fighter, so he came with all that. Also, his day job was working with autistic kids, and a lot of what he did was help prepare kids with autism and adults to sort of like make it in the real world. And I think a lot of those skills translate really well to the type of work, because a lot of what these people are running into on the streets is people with severe mental health issues.
Yes.
And I think he was really well equipped to de-escalate situations, and he had a lot of familiarity with like handling people who think differently. And I think that was in some way one of his superpowers, just his ability to handle those situations with experience as they were happening.
So do you feel like the power of the word? In other words, there's a thing that we called it verbal taekwondo, and that is that you can use your words to control other people's emotions. Did you see that power in Phoenix?
100%. Wow. I saw him use it on me. Phoenix is incredibly charismatic, he just has a way with words. He will convince you of a lot of things if you give him a minute, To
take that ride on the snow-capped peaks, meaning Coke, the thing is that, was he searching for that next rush? Because when you're a superhero, it's all about the adrenaline flowing through that body.
Well, Phoenix claims that he has never once been that he's never done drugs himself,
Okay.
and that in the instances where he was caught, and the way he was caught, and he got busted twice, but one of them was that he got texts from a woman who said her name was Laura, and then they started chatting, and Phoenix said him and his girlfriend were polyamorous, and maybe they could all hang out. And she said, "Great, why don't you come to this hotel? By the way, could you bring some MDMA, some ecstasy, because I have some other girlfriends in town." And so it's like when I read the police reports and the transcripts from that bust, it does not come across to me that he is any sort of drug kingpin or sort of big dealer. I got the impression that he maybe ended up helping someone out or thinking he was going into one kind of situation and brought some drugs along. Also, throughout his career as an MMA fighter, and because he's now on felony probation, he gets drug tested regularly, and he's never failed a drug test in his life in the many years that he fought. So, I also heard from other people that knew him that say that he did start using drugs afterwards. So, I think it is true that during a lot of his career, he was not doing drugs. And I do feel like even in the case of his arrests, I don't necessarily think they were related to his own drug use, but I also found a lot of instances where Phoenix did lie to me. So it's always one of those situations where it's difficult to know what to believe,
Do you confront a superhero when they're lying? You mean it's like, dude, you're lying to me. I'm telling you, you're lying to me.
I did many times. Yeah, you'll hear me confront Phoenix on many of those issues. We did several sort of 3 to 4 hour long interview sessions, and a lot of those sessions where I was interviewing him was me just coming to him with long lists of accusations from his former teammates and being like, okay, Evocadus says he saw you with a bottle of date rape drugs at your house one day, and like all these sort of situations. And so I put them all to him, and you'll hear him respond to a lot of those in the podcast.
Listeners need to understand that your podcast, The Superhero Complex, the sound bites that you have are priceless. I mean, you've got to be protecting these things for future endeavors, such as, if you can turn it into... Did you film any of this to where you can make a special?
We did not film any of it. It was strictly audio. Large part because, people act differently, I think, under video.
Yes.
And it just, for this project, I think it made a lot of sense for us to just keep it low key. Also, when I was out traveling with the superheroes, I didn't want to be having a camera and all that stuff. So yeah. But yeah, I've gotten interest from some people in the TV world about maybe doing something on him. So you never know.
Yeah, you just painted the picture of, because when you go out and you help out the people of homelessness, that's exactly, they would sit there, you'd say, are you homeless? No, I'm home now. I'm not homeless. So when you go out there into that world, I mean, you don't bring a camera because you're not going to gain any confidence or even faith in you from those people.
Yeah, I often felt, weird just being out there, even with my recording equipment, my microphone, just because they were really intense situations. And there were people that were really suffering, and it's not, you don't want to go into a situation where someone's struggling and just be, putting them all over the news and things like that. So yeah, those were definitely some sensitive situations.
How did the podcast change you? Because I mean, doing a series podcast like you're doing, I mean, it's like writing a book. It clears out a lot in your soul.
Yeah, it made me think a lot about my my own assumptions about people, especially people like real life superheroes. I mean, I think hopefully I came out of this being maybe a little less dismissive of people and like willing to give someone a chance and hear their story before I draw any conclusions about who they are. Because I did really feel kind of disoriented at points where things I thought I knew for certain were true turned out not to be. So
basically your empathy increased.
Yeah, I would say so, yeah.
Well, you can hear it. When you're sharing this story, it's like, oh, my God, this guy was actually there. This is not just a reporter. You were actually there.
Yeah, I know. I spent a lot of time in this world, for sure. It was fun. It was strange. But, yeah, I had a really good time doing it.
So now, and this is one podcast. Is there going to be a continuation in the way of the superhero of Butte, Montana, or New York City?
I don't know about another show, but so we're definitely going to do some bonus episodes. Oh. And we actually interviewed a bunch of superheroes all over the world, people who weren't necessarily related to Phoenix. But yeah, these people exist all over the world. So we're definitely going to feature some of them in some bonus episodes where you'll get to just sort of meet a variety of superheroes from all over the world.
I love it, man. You got to come back to this show anytime in the future, David. The door is always going to be open for you.
Oh, thanks. I loved it. This was great. I really appreciate it.
Well, you be brilliant today, okay, sir?
You too.